On the busy morning of a trial, a uniformed man leads a police dog to the courthouse entrance, keeping it alert to every move. Among the crowd, a mother holds the hand of her 3-year-old daughter, far too young to be there. As the session is about to begin, the girl lets go of her mother's hand and walks silently to the animal. The dog holds its gaze, not moving an inch. The girl leans in, whispers something, and the silence is broken by a sharp bark. The handler moves quickly. Toward the point indicated, a man at the back of the room is watched. But what happens next? No one will ever know. Love animal stories. Subscribe now and don't miss any. Thanks for watching. Now, back to our story. That morning, the Jefferson County Courthouse in downtown Louisville was busier than usual. People hurried in and out. Through the heavy oak doors, lawyers shuffled papers and whispered among themselves, while the sound of hurried footsteps echoed throughout the main corridor. The tension in the air was palpable, and not just because of the case that would be heard that day. There was an unusual element catching everyone's attention: the presence of a police dog positioned near the entrance, alert to every movement. In the hall, the German Shepherd was an imposing figure, trained to detect clues and assist in investigations. He stood there not merely as a security measure, but as part of a preventive strategy that few fully understood. His handler, Officer Marcus Thompson, kept a steady hand on the leash while scanning the crowd with experienced eyes. Marcus had been working with Rex for 3 years now, and he knew every subtle signal the dog displayed. Among the people entering the building was Sarah Mitchell, a 34-year-old kindergarten teacher, holding the hand of her 3-year-old. Her daughter, Emma. The little girl seemed to observe everything with curiosity, but also with an intense gaze, as if she already knew this environment well. Her presence hadn't been planned, and according to some witnesses, it made no sense for someone so young to be there. Sarah adjusted her navy blue blazer nervously as they walked through the metal detectors. She had tried everything to convince Emma to stay with her grandmother that morning, but the child had been unusually insistent about coming along. Since early dawn, Emma had been repeating that she wanted to see the dog up close. Nobody had taken the request seriously until minutes before the hearing was scheduled to begin, when Sarah finally gave in to her daughter's persistent pleas. The courthouse lobby buzzed with activity as attorneys from both sides made last-minute preparations. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh reviewed her notes one final time, her silver-rimmed glasses reflecting the fluorescent lights overhead. She had been working on this civil case for months, representing the interests of the Riverside Community Development Project against allegations of environmental misconduct. The case had drawn significant attention from local media and environmental groups. On the opposing side, defense attorney Robert Hayes organized his documents with methodical precision. His client, Riverside Development Corporation, faced serious accusations of improper waste disposal that had allegedly contaminated a nearby creek. The stakes were high, with potential damages reaching into the millions and the company's reputation hanging in the balance. Emma's small hand gripped her mother's fingers tightly as they found seats in the public gallery. The courtroom's high ceilings and dark wood paneling created an atmosphere of solemnity that seemed to affect even the youngest visitor. Sarah noticed how Emma's bright blue eyes took in every detail, from the American flag standing beside the judge's bench to the court reporter setting up her equipment. Judge Patricia Coleman entered promptly at 9 o'clock, her black robes flowing as she took her position behind the bench. She was known throughout Jefferson County for her fair but firm approach to legal proceedings. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her sharp brown eyes commanded respect from everyone in the courtroom. All rise for the Honorable. Judge Coleman, announced the bailiff, Deputy Sheriff William Carter. The entire courtroom stood in unison, creating a momentary hush that was broken only by the sound of chairs scraping against the wooden floor. As Judge Coleman prepared to open the session, Emma suddenly released her mother's hand and began walking slowly toward Rex, the police dog. Every pair of eyes in the courtroom followed her small figure as she made her way down the aisle. Sarah's heart raced as she watched her daughter approach the large German Shepherd, assuming Emma simply wanted to pet the animal. Officer Thompson tensed slightly, ready to intervene if necessary, but Rex remained calm and alert. The dog's ears perked up as the little girl drew near, and his dark eyes focused intently on her approaching figure. Emma moved with a confidence that seemed unusual for someone her age, as if she had done this before. When Emma reached Rex, she leaned down close to the dog's ear and whispered something that no one else could hear. Her words were soft and brief, but the reaction was immediate and startling. Rex, who had been maintaining his professional composure until that moment, suddenly stood up straight and fixed his gaze on a specific point. In the public gallery, a short, firm bark broke the silence of the courtroom, immediately putting everyone on high alert. Officer Thompson reacted instantly, guiding Rex in the direction indicated by the dog's instincts. The German Shepherd's body language had shifted dramatically, and Marcus recognized the signals that indicated his partner had detected something significant. The dog's tail was rigid, his ears forward, and his entire posture suggested focused attention on a potential target. The general attention turned to a man sitting discreetly in the back of the courtroom. Until that moment, he had gone completely unnoticed among the other observers. He was average in appearance, wearing a brown jacket and khaki pants, with thinning dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His hands rested calmly in his lap, but there was something about his stillness that now seemed deliberate rather than natural. Deputy Carter immediately approached the man, while Officer Thompson kept Rex under control. The dog continued to show signs of alert interest, his nose twitching as he processed scents that his training had taught him to recognize. The man looked up with what appeared to be genuine confusion as the deputy sheriff reached his row. "Excuse me, sir, may I see some identification?" Deputy Carter asked in a professional but firm tone. The man reached slowly into his jacket pocket and produced a driver's license that identified him as Thomas Bradley, from a suburb about 30 miles away. Meanwhile, courthouse security began checking the attendance records and visitor logs. The process was routine, but the circumstances had elevated the importance of verifying everyone's presence. Sarah Mitchell watched the proceedings with growing anxiety, her mind racing as she tried to understand what was happening and why her daughter's innocent gesture had triggered such a response. Emma returned to her mother's side with the same calm confidence she had displayed throughout the morning. She climbed onto the wooden bench and settled beside Sarah, who wrapped a protective arm around her small daughter. The little girl's expression remained serene, but her eyes continued to track the movements of both Rex and the man who had captured the dog's attention. Judge Coleman observed the situation with the patience of someone who had presided over countless unexpected courtroom moments during her 20-year career. She understood the importance of allowing security protocols to proceed while maintaining the dignity and order of her courtroom. The attorneys on both sides watched with professional interest, wondering how this development might affect their case. Officer Thompson continued his assessment of Rex's behavior, noting the subtle but persistent signs that his partner had detected something worthy of investigation. The dog's training had been extensive, and his track record was impressive, making it unlikely that this was a false alert. Whatever Emma had whispered to Rex had clearly triggered a response based on the animal's professional capabilities rather than simple curiosity or playfulness. The man, identified as Thomas Bradley, cooperated fully with the security check, answering questions about his presence with apparent honesty. He claimed to be a concerned citizen interested in environmental issues, which would explain his attendance at a hearing involving potential pollution violations. However, his name did not appear on any of the official lists of registered attendees or known interested parties. As the initial commotion settled, Judge Coleman decided to proceed with the scheduled hearing while allowing security personnel to continue their verification process discreetly. The morning had already taken an unexpected turn, and she sensed that the day's proceedings might hold more surprises than anyone had anticipated. While courthouse security continued their background check on Thomas Bradley, Sarah Mitchell found herself wrestling with a disturbing memory that had suddenly surfaced. She held Emma closer, her mind drifting back to an incident 3 days earlier at Henderson's Market, the local grocery store where she did her weekly shopping. It had been a routine Tuesday afternoon when Sarah noticed Emma behaving strangely. In the produce section, the little girl had stopped suddenly near the display of apples, her small body growing rigid as her eyes fixed on something across the store. Following her daughter's gaze, Sarah had spotted a man examining canned goods in the next aisle over. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him, just an ordinary-looking person going about his shopping. But Emma's reaction had been anything but ordinary. She had grabbed Sarah's hand with surprising force and pulled her in the opposite direction, refusing to explain why she wanted to leave that part of the store so urgently. When Sarah tried to ask what was wrong, Emma had simply shaken her head and said they needed to go find the nice doggy that could help. At the time, Sarah had assumed her daughter was just being imaginative, as 3-year-olds often were. Now, sitting in the courthouse and watching the same man being questioned by Deputy Carter, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The coincidence seemed too significant to ignore, but she struggled with whether to speak up about something that might be nothing more than her daughter's overactive imagination. Officer Thompson maintained his position with Rex while observing the ongoing security check. The German Shepherd's alert behavior had subsided somewhat, but he remained focused on Thomas Bradley with an intensity that Marcus found professionally concerning. In his years of working with police dogs, he had learned to trust their instincts, even when the reasons weren't immediately apparent. The courtroom had settled into an unusual rhythm as Judge Coleman began the preliminary proceedings, while security personnel worked discreetly in the background. District Attorney Walsh called her first witness, Dr. Margaret Foster, an environmental scientist who had conducted studies on the allegedly contaminated creek near the Riverside development site. Dr. Foster was a petite woman in her 50s, with graying auburn hair and intelligent green eyes behind stylish frames. She had spent most of her career studying water quality issues and had developed a reputation for thorough, unbiased research. Her testimony was crucial to establishing the prosecution's case regarding the environmental impact of the development project. As Dr. Foster took the witness stand and was sworn in, Thomas Bradley shifted slightly in his seat. The movement was subtle, but Officer Thompson noticed it, as did Rex, whose ears perked up once again. The dog's reaction suggested that whatever had triggered his initial alert was still present and potentially intensifying. Dr. Foster, District Attorney Walsh began, "Please tell the court about your background and qualifications in environmental science." The witness launched into a detailed description of her education and career, including her work with the Environmental Protection Agency and various academic institutions. Her credentials were impressive, establishing her as an expert whose opinions would carry significant weight with the court. Meanwhile, Deputy Carter completed his initial check of Thomas Bradley's identification and moved to verify his background. Through the courthouse's computer system, the process revealed that Bradley was, indeed, a real person with a clean record, employed as an accountant at a small firm in Oldham County. However, his presence at this particular hearing still seemed oddly coincidental, given that he had no obvious connection to the case. Sarah Mitchell struggled with her growing unease as she watched the proceedings unfold. Emma had settled quietly beside her, but the little girl's attention remained divided between the witness testimony and the activities of the security personnel. There was something almost knowing in her daughter's expression that Sarah found both impressive and unsettling. During a brief recess, Sarah made a decision that would prove significant. She approached Officer Thompson and quietly explained about the incident at Henderson's Market 3 days earlier. Her voice was hesitant as she described Emma's unusual reaction to seeing the same man who was now being questioned in the courtroom. Marcus Thompson listened carefully to Sarah's account, his professional training helping him evaluate the potential significance of her observations. While he understood that young children could be unpredictable and imaginative, the combination of Emma's behavior at the store, her interaction with Rex, and the dog's subsequent alert created a pattern that warranted further investigation. "Mrs. Mitchell," Officer Thompson said thoughtfully, "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Would you be willing to speak with our investigation team about what you observed at the market?" Sarah nodded, though she felt uncertain about the implications of her decision. She had always tried to protect Emma from adult concerns and complications, but circumstances seemed to be drawing them into something larger than she had anticipated. As court reconvened, Dr. Foster continued her testimony about the water quality testing she had conducted near the Riverside development site. Her findings indicated elevated levels of industrial pollutants that were consistent with improper waste disposal practices. The testimony was technical but compelling, painting a clear picture of environmental damage that would require expensive remediation efforts. Defense attorney Robert Hayes listened intently, taking detailed notes and preparing for his cross-examination. His strategy involved challenging the methodology and conclusions of Dr. Foster's research, hoping to create reasonable doubt about the source and extent of the contamination. Thomas Bradley remained in his seat, apparently following the proceedings, with the interest of any concerned citizen. However, Officer Thompson noticed that the man's attention seemed to intensify whenever Dr. Foster mentioned specific dates or locations related to her environmental testing. These subtle reactions, combined with Rex's continued alertness, suggested that Bradley's interest in the case might be more personal than he had initially indicated. The morning progressed with additional technical testimony about soil samples, water flow patterns, and pollution dispersal models. The information was complex and detailed, requiring careful attention from everyone involved in the case. Judge Coleman proved adept at managing the technical aspects while ensuring that the proceedings remained accessible to the jury. During another brief break, courthouse security completed their background investigation of Thomas Bradley. The results confirmed his identity and employment, but revealed an interesting detail that had not been immediately apparent. Bradley's accounting firm had several corporate clients, including companies involved in waste management and environmental services. While this connection might be coincidental, it added another layer of complexity to his presence at the hearing. Officer Thompson shared this information with Deputy Carter, who decided to conduct a more detailed interview with Bradley. During the lunch recess, the man's cooperation thus far had been exemplary, but the accumulating coincidences suggested that a deeper conversation might be warranted. As the morning session drew to a close, Sarah Mitchell found herself watching Thomas Bradley with increasing curiosity. Her daughter's unusual behavior at the grocery store, combined with Emma's mysterious communication with Rex, had created a puzzle that seemed to be growing more complex by the hour. Emma herself remained remarkably calm and observant. Throughout the proceedings, occasionally whispering quiet comments to her mother about what she was seeing. Most of her observations were typical of a 3-year-old's perspective on adult activities, but Sarah noticed that her daughter seemed particularly interested in the movements and reactions of the courthouse security team. Judge Coleman announced a 90-minute lunch recess, during which the attorneys would have time to prepare for the afternoon session, and the security team would continue their investigation. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Sarah noticed that Thomas Bradley remained seated, apparently in no hurry to leave, despite the break in proceedings. The morning had established the foundation for what promised to be a complex and potentially controversial case, but the unexpected elements introduced by Emma's interaction with Rex had added an entirely new dimension to the day's events. As participants and observers headed off for lunch, few realized that the afternoon would bring revelations that would transform their understanding of everything they thought they knew about the case. During the lunch recess, Officer Thompson decided to conduct a more thorough security sweep of the courtroom with Rex. The German Shepherd's earlier alerts had been too specific and sustained to ignore, and Marcus trusted his partner's instincts enough to investigate further. As most people filed out to grab lunch at nearby restaurants or the courthouse cafeteria, the courtroom offered an opportunity for a more detailed examination. Rex moved through the aisles with professional precision, his nose working methodically. As he processed the various scents that lingered in the air, Officer Thompson followed closely, watching for any signs that his partner had detected something worthy of attention. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden benches and polished floors. Sarah Mitchell had taken Emma to the courthouse cafeteria for a simple lunch of sandwiches and apple juice. The little girl seemed unusually quiet as she picked at her food, her blue eyes occasionally drifting toward the direction of the courtroom they had left behind. When Sarah asked if she was feeling all right, Emma simply nodded and said that the doggy was still working. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Sarah asked gently, trying to understand her daughter's perspective on the morning's events. Emma looked up with the serious expression that sometimes appeared on her young face when she was thinking about something important. "The doggy knows things, Mommy. He's looking for the hidden stuff." Before Sarah could ask what she meant by hidden stuff, Emma had returned her attention to her sandwich, apparently considering the conversation complete. Sarah found herself wondering, not for the first time, how her 3-year-old daughter seemed to possess insights that adults missed. Back in the courtroom, Rex had completed his circuit of the public gallery and was now investigating the area near the judge's bench and counsel tables. His behavior remained alert but controlled until he reached a specific section along the side wall where several wooden benches were positioned for additional seating. Suddenly, his posture changed dramatically. The German Shepherd's body went rigid, his nose pointing directly toward one particular bench near the left side of the room. His tail stood straight and his ears focused forward in the classic alert position that Officer Thompson had seen countless times during their partnership. Rex began to whine softly, a sound that indicated he had found something significant. "What is it, boy?" Marcus asked quietly, moving closer to examine the area that had captured his partner's attention. Rex positioned himself directly in front of a dark wooden bench that appeared identical to all the others in the courtroom. He sat down and fixed his gaze on Officer Thompson, a behavior that indicated he had completed a successful search and was waiting for his handler to investigate the location he had identified. Marcus knelt down and began examining the bench more carefully. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual about the heavy wooden construction or the worn velvet cushions that covered the seating area. However, Rex's alert behavior was too specific to ignore, and his track record for accuracy was virtually flawless. Using his flashlight, Officer Thompson looked underneath the bench and immediately noticed something that shouldn't have been there. Wedged between the wooden support beams and partially hidden by shadows was a small package wrapped in brown paper and secured with tape. The object was roughly the size of a paperback book and had been carefully positioned to avoid casual detection. "Good boy, Rex," Marcus said softly, rewarding his partner with praise while carefully extracting the package from its hiding place. He handled the item with the caution required for potential evidence, using his handkerchief to avoid direct contact while preserving any fingerprints that might be present. The package was heavier than its size suggested, and there was something about its careful concealment that immediately raised red flags. Officer Thompson called Deputy Carter on his radio, requesting immediate assistance from the courthouse security team and the detective unit. Whatever Emma had communicated to Rex earlier had led to the discovery of what appeared to be deliberately hidden material. Detective Linda Rodriguez arrived within 15 minutes, accompanied by the courthouse's senior security supervisor, Captain James Sullivan. Detective Rodriguez was a 15-year veteran of the Louisville Metro Police Department with specialized training in evidence collection and courtroom security. Her reputation for thoroughness and attention to detail made her the natural choice for investigating unusual circumstances. "What do we have here, Marcus?" Detective Rodriguez asked as she examined the package that Officer Thompson had carefully placed on a nearby table. "Rex alerted to this specific location after interacting with a 3-year-old girl this morning," Marcus explained. "The child approached him during the opening of court session and whispered something to him. His behavior has been focused and sustained ever since." Captain Sullivan documented the discovery with photographs while Detective Rodriguez began the process of carefully unwrapping the package. The brown paper was generic, the type that could be purchased at any office supply store, but the tape had been applied with methodical precision that suggested deliberate concealment rather than hasty disposal. Inside the wrapping, they found a manila envelope containing what appeared to be photocopied documents and several photographs. The papers bore official letterheads from various environmental agencies and testing laboratories, while the photographs showed locations that Detective Rodriguez immediately recognized as areas near the Riverside development site. "This is interesting," Detective Rodriguez murmured as she examined the materials more closely. "These documents appear to be related to the environmental case being heard today, but they're not part of the official evidence file." Captain Sullivan leaned over to examine the photographs, which showed various stages of construction and waste disposal activities at the development site. Some of the images were date-stamped from periods that predated the official investigation, suggesting they might represent undisclosed evidence of early environmental violations. Officer Thompson remained with Rex, who continued to show signs of alertness even after the package had been removed from its hiding place. The dog's behavior suggested that there might be additional items or that the significance of the discovery was greater than initially apparent. "We need to determine how long this package has been here and who might have placed it," Detective Rodriguez said thoughtfully. "The positioning suggests someone with familiarity with the courtroom layout and access to this specific area." As they continued their examination, the documents revealed what appeared to be preliminary environmental impact reports that contradicted some of the information presented during the morning's testimony. The photographs showed evidence of waste disposal activities that had not been disclosed in the official case files, potentially indicating that someone had been documenting environmental violations independently. The discovery raised immediate questions about the integrity of the evidence in the ongoing case and the possibility that important information had been deliberately withheld from the court. Detective Rodriguez recognized that this development could significantly impact the proceedings and might require notification of both the judge and the attorneys involved in the case. Meanwhile, Thomas Bradley had not left the courthouse during the lunch recess. Instead, he had remained in the lobby area, occasionally glancing toward the courtroom doors while appearing to read a newspaper. His behavior might have seemed normal under ordinary circumstances, but given the morning's events and the discovery of the hidden package, his continued presence began to take on greater significance. Captain Sullivan dispatched additional security personnel to monitor Bradley discreetly while the investigation continued. The man's identity had been verified, but his connection to the case and his reasons for attending the hearing remained unclear. The timing of his presence, combined with the discovery of the concealed documents, created a pattern that warranted careful observation. Detective Rodriguez began the process of comparing the newly discovered documents with the official case files to identify any discrepancies or connections. The preliminary examination suggested that the hidden materials contained information that could potentially alter the direction of the environmental hearing, but a thorough analysis would be required to determine their authenticity and relevance. The lunch recess neared its end. Sarah Mitchell and Emma returned to the courthouse lobby. The little girl seemed more animated than she had during lunch, her eyes immediately seeking out the location where Rex and Officer Thompson were stationed. Emma tugged on her mother's hand and pointed toward the courtroom doors with obvious eagerness. "The doggy found the hidden stuff, didn't he, Mommy?" Emma said with the confidence of someone who had expected exactly this outcome. Sarah stared at her daughter in amazement, wondering how a 3-year-old could possibly have anticipated the discovery that was now creating such activity among the courthouse security team. The morning's events had already challenged her understanding of coincidence and intuition, but Emma's apparent foreknowledge of the situation seemed to defy logical explanation. As participants began returning for the afternoon session, word of the discovery had begun to spread quietly among the courthouse staff. The finding of concealed documents related to an ongoing case represented a serious security breach and a potential obstruction of justice that would require immediate attention from the presiding judge. As court reconvened for the afternoon session, Detective Rodriguez had completed her preliminary analysis of the documents discovered beneath the wooden bench. The findings were significant enough to warrant an immediate conference with Judge Coleman, District Attorney Walsh, and Defense Attorney Robert Hayes. The hidden materials appeared to contain environmental test results that predated the official investigation by several months, potentially indicating that someone had been conducting unauthorized surveillance of the Riverside development site. Judge Coleman called for a brief sidebar conference at her bench, during which Detective Rodriguez presented the discovered evidence to both legal teams. The judge's expression grew increasingly serious as she reviewed the documents and photographs that had been concealed in her own courtroom. "Your Honor," Detective Rodriguez explained quietly, "these materials appear to be authentic environmental reports and photographic documentation that were not part of the original evidence submitted by either side. The date stamps suggest they were created before the official investigation began, which raises questions about their source and the reasons for their concealment." District Attorney Walsh examined the documents with obvious concern. Several of the test results showed pollution levels that were significantly higher than those reported in the official environmental impact studies, while the photographs depicted waste disposal activities that had not been disclosed during the discovery process. Defense Attorney Hayes studied the materials with equal intensity, recognizing that their authenticity could dramatically impact his client's position in the case. If the documents proved legitimate, They could provide evidence of environmental violations that predated the timeline established in the original complaint, potentially exposing his client to additional liability. "This is highly irregular," Judge Coleman observed. "How long have these materials been concealed in my courtroom, and who had access to place them there?" Detective Rodriguez explained the circumstances of the discovery, including Emma's interaction with Rex and the police dog's subsequent alert behavior. While the judge found the story unusual, she recognized the professional competence of Officer Thompson and the proven reliability of police dog alerts in legal proceedings. As the sidebar conference continued, Thomas Bradley remained seated in the public gallery, apparently unaware of the significance of the discussion taking place at the judge's bench. However, Officer Thompson noticed that the man's posture had become noticeably more tense since court had reconvened, and Rex continued to show subtle signs of interest in Bradley's location. Captain Sullivan had completed a more thorough background investigation of Thomas Bradley during the lunch break, revealing information that added another layer of complexity to the situation. While Bradley's employment as an accountant had been confirmed, further research showed that his firm had provided financial services to several companies involved in environmental consulting and waste management. More significantly, one of the firm's clients was Meridian Environmental Services, a company that had conducted preliminary assessments of the Riverside development site before the official investigation began. This connection provided a potential explanation for Bradley's presence at the hearing and his possible access to undisclosed environmental data. Detective Rodriguez received this information through her radio earpiece during the sidebar conference and immediately shared it with Judge Coleman and the attorneys. The revelation that Bradley might have professional connections to companies involved in the environmental assessment process transformed him from a curious observer to a person of significant interest in the case. "Your Honor," Detective Rodriguez said quietly, "we've discovered that Mr. Bradley has professional connections to environmental consulting firms that may have conducted work at the development site. This could explain how he gained access to the concealed documents and why they were hidden in the courtroom." Judge Coleman realized that the situation had evolved beyond a simple courtroom disruption to a potential case of evidence tampering and obstruction of justice. She made the decision to suspend the afternoon proceedings temporarily, while law enforcement conducted a more thorough investigation of the circumstances surrounding the concealed documents. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Coleman announced to the courtroom, "due to the discovery of additional evidence that may be relevant to this case, I am declaring a temporary recess while the appropriate authorities conduct their investigation. All parties will be notified when proceedings are scheduled to resume." As court personnel began the process of securing the courtroom, Detective Rodriguez approached Thomas Bradley for a formal interview. The man's cooperation remained polite and professional, but his nervousness had become increasingly apparent. As the afternoon progressed, "Mr. Bradley," Detective Rodriguez began, "I need to ask you some questions about your presence here today and your possible knowledge of documents that were discovered concealed in this courtroom." Bradley's face showed genuine surprise at the mention of concealed documents, and his response seemed authentically confused. "I don't know anything about hidden documents, Detective. I'm just here because I'm interested in environmental issues. My neighborhood is downstream from the development site, and I wanted to hear the testimony firsthand." However, when Detective Rodriguez mentioned his professional connections to Meridian Environmental Services, Bradley's demeanor shifted noticeably. He admitted that his accounting firm had provided services to the environmental consulting company, but claimed his involvement had been limited to routine financial record keeping. Did your work with Meridian Environmental Services give you access to preliminary assessment reports from the Riverside development site? Detective Rodriguez asked directly. Bradley hesitated before answering, and his pause was long enough to suggest internal conflict about his response. I may have seen some reports in the course of my accounting work, but I'm bound by confidentiality. Agreements with my clients. I can't discuss specific documents without permission from the company. Officer Thompson and Rex maintained their position nearby during the interview, and the German Shepherd's continued alertness suggested that Bradley's story might not be complete. Dogs trained in detection work often responded to stress and deception as well as physical evidence, and Rex's behavior indicated that something about the situation still warranted attention. Sarah Mitchell and Emma had remained in the courtroom during the recess, watching the unfolding investigation with fascination and concern. Emma seemed particularly interested in the interaction between Detective Rodriguez and Thomas Bradley, occasionally whispering observations to her mother that demonstrated an unusual awareness of adult social dynamics. "Mommy," Emma said quietly, "the man knows about the papers, but he's scared to tell the truth." Sarah looked at her daughter with amazement, wondering how a 3-year-old could read subtle cues that trained investigators were still working to interpret. Emma's insights throughout the day had proven remarkably accurate, suggesting an intuitive understanding that exceeded her chronological age. As the interview continued, Detective Rodriguez began to piece together a timeline that connected Bradley's access to environmental documents with their concealment in the courtroom. While his accounting work had legitimately given him access to Meridian's files, the question remained whether he had acted independently or in coordination with others to hide potentially damaging evidence. The photographs discovered in the concealed package showed environmental violations that occurred before the official investigation began, suggesting that someone had been documenting problems at the development site without reporting them to the appropriate authorities. If Bradley had access to this information through his professional connections, his decision to conceal rather than reveal it could constitute obstruction of justice. Captain Sullivan coordinated with courthouse security to review surveillance footage from recent weeks, looking for evidence of when the package might have been placed beneath the wooden bench. The courthouse's security system maintained comprehensive coverage of public areas, and the positioning of cameras should have captured anyone who approached the specific location where the documents were hidden. Meanwhile, District Attorney Walsh and Defense Attorney Hayes conferred separately about the implications of the newly discovered evidence. Both attorneys recognized that the concealed documents could significantly impact the case, but they needed time to authenticate the materials and determine their admissibility in court. Dr. Margaret Foster, who had testified earlier about her environmental research, remained available for additional questions about the newly discovered test results. Her initial examination of the concealed documents suggested they contained legitimate scientific data, but she needed time to verify the methodology and compare the findings with her own research. As the afternoon wore on, the investigation began to reveal a complex web of professional relationships and conflicting interests surrounding the Riverside development case. The concealed documents appeared to be part of a larger pattern of information that had been deliberately withheld from the official legal proceedings. Emma's remarkable intuition about the hidden evidence and her apparent ability to communicate effectively with Rex had been the catalyst for uncovering what might prove to be a significant obstruction of justice. Her mother watched with pride and bewilderment as her 3-year-old daughter continued to observe the adult proceedings with wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. The day that had begun as a routine environmental hearing had evolved into a complex investigation involving concealed evidence, professional misconduct, and the extraordinary intuitive abilities of a young child. As law enforcement continued their work, it became clear that the afternoon would bring revelations that could transform everyone's understanding of the case and the motivations of those involved in the environmental dispute. The courthouse security surveillance footage revealed the breakthrough that Detective Rodriguez had been hoping for. Captain Sullivan's review of the recordings from the past 2 weeks showed Thomas Bradley entering the courtroom on 3 separate occasions outside of normal hearing hours, using credentials that identified him as a maintenance contractor. The footage clearly showed him accessing the area where the documents were eventually discovered, providing concrete evidence of his involvement in concealing the materials. When confronted with this evidence, Bradley's composure finally cracked. His carefully maintained facade of innocent curiosity dissolved as he realized that denial was no longer viable. Detective Rodriguez observed the subtle changes in his body language and recognized the moment when a suspect decided to cooperate, rather than continue misleading investigators. "Mr. Bradley," Detective Rodriguez said firmly but not unkindly, "the surveillance footage shows you placing materials beneath that bench. I think it's time you told us the whole truth about why you're really here and what you hope to accomplish." Thomas Bradley's shoulders sagged as he accepted the inevitable. He looked around the courtroom where his deception had been unraveled. By the combined efforts of a police dog, a 3-year-old girl, and thorough investigative work. The irony of his situation was not lost on him as he prepared to reveal the motivations behind his actions. "You're right," Bradley admitted quietly. "I did hide those documents, but not for the reasons you might think. I wasn't trying to help either side in this case. I was trying to expose the truth about what really happened at the development site." Detective Rodriguez encouraged him to continue, while Officer Thompson maintained his position with Rex, who had finally relaxed his alert posture now that the source of his concern was being addressed openly. The German Shepherd seemed to sense that the tension in the situation was beginning to resolve. Bradley explained that his accounting work with Meridian Environmental Services had given him access to preliminary assessment reports that showed extensive environmental damage at the Riverside development site months before the official investigation began. However, when he attempted to discuss his concerns with his supervisors, he was told that the information was covered by client confidentiality agreements and could not be disclosed. "I watched as Meridian prepared sanitized reports that downplayed the environmental damage," Bradley continued. "The company was being paid by Riverside Development to minimize their liability, and the real extent of the pollution was being covered up. I copied the original documents because I believed the public had a right to know the truth." The revelation that Meridian Environmental Services had been deliberately understating environmental damage added a new dimension to the case that neither District Attorney Walsh nor Defense Attorney Hayes had anticipated. The concealed documents represented evidence of a conspiracy to mislead the court and the public about the true environmental impact of the development project. Emma, who had been listening to the adult conversation with remarkable attention, for someone her age, tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered something that only Sarah could hear. When Sarah looked down at her daughter with surprise, Emma simply nodded toward Thomas Bradley with an expression that seemed to convey understanding and sympathy. "He was trying to help," Emma said softly to her mother. The doggy knew he was. Scared, not bad. Sarah realized that her daughter had somehow intuited the difference between malicious intent and misguided action, recognizing that Bradley's deception had been motivated by a desire to reveal rather than conceal wrongdoing. Emma's remarkable perceptiveness continued to amaze everyone who witnessed her insights throughout the day. Detective Rodriguez continued her interview with Bradley, learning that his plan had been to anonymously tip off courthouse security about the hidden documents during the trial, hoping that their discovery would force both legal teams to address the real environmental data. However, his presence in the courtroom had been motivated by his desire to witness the revelation of the truth he had risked his career to preserve. "Why didn't you simply contact the authorities directly with this information?" Detective Rodriguez asked. Bradley explained that he had considered that option, but feared that his professional obligations to his accounting firm and Meridian Environmental Services would prevent the information from being accepted as evidence. By concealing the documents in the courtroom, he hoped to ensure they would be discovered in a context where they could not be dismissed or suppressed by corporate interests. Judge Coleman, who had been monitoring the interview from her chambers through the courthouse's communication system, made the decision to reconvene court immediately to address the new revelations. The discovery of the concealed documents and Bradley's explanation of their origin had transformed what began as a civil environmental case into a potential investigation of corporate fraud and conspiracy. As court reconvened, District Attorney Walsh found herself in the unexpected position of potentially pursuing charges against Meridian Environmental Services for deliberately misleading the court, while also considering whether Thomas Bradley's actions constituted obstruction of justice or whistleblowing. The legal complexities of the situation would require careful analysis of state and federal environmental protection laws. Defense attorney Hayes faced an equally challenging situation, as his client Riverside Development Corporation might have been a victim of deceptive consulting services rather than the primary perpetrator of environmental violations. The concealed documents suggested that Meridian Environmental Services had provided false information to multiple parties, potentially including Hayes' own client. Dr. Margaret Foster was recalled to the witness stand to examine the newly discovered environmental test results and compare them with the data she had used in her original testimony. Her professional analysis confirmed that the concealed documents contained legitimate scientific measurements that showed pollution levels significantly higher than those reported in the official environmental impact studies. "Your Honor," Dr. Foster testified, "these results indicate that serious environmental contamination was present at the development site months before the timeline established in the original complaint. The data suggests that remediation efforts should have begun much earlier, and that the scope of the environmental damage is greater than previously acknowledged." The testimony established that the concealed documents were not only authentic, but also critical to understanding the true environmental impact of the development project. The revelation that this information had been deliberately withheld from the court proceedings raised serious questions about the integrity of the entire legal process. Officer Thompson and Rex had completed their security duties for the day, but Marcus remained in the courtroom to observe the resolution of the case that his partner had helped uncover. The German Shepherd rested quietly beside his handler, seemingly satisfied that his alert behavior had led to the discovery of important information. Emma Mitchell continued to watch the proceedings with the same intense focus she had displayed. Throughout the day, her mother marveled at her daughter's stamina and attention span, which far exceeded what Sarah would have expected from a 3-year-old attending adult legal proceedings. Emma's initial insistence on coming to court now seemed prescient rather than merely stubborn. As the afternoon testimony continued, it became clear that the environmental case would need to be restructured to address the new evidence and the potential involvement of additional parties. Meridian Environmental Services would likely face investigation for their role in concealing environmental data, while Thomas Bradley's actions would require evaluation under whistleblower protection statutes. The Riverside Development Corporation found itself in the complex position of potentially being both victim and perpetrator in the environmental violations. While the company had clearly contributed to pollution at the development site, their reliance on falsified consulting reports might mitigate their culpability for the full extent of the environmental damage. Judge Coleman recognized that the case had grown beyond the scope of a single hearing and would require extensive additional investigation before a final resolution could be reached. However, the day's revelations had established a foundation for addressing the real environmental issues and holding the appropriate parties accountable for their actions. As the formal proceedings concluded for the day, Thomas Bradley faced the possibility of legal consequences for his actions, but also the potential recognition that his efforts had helped expose important environmental violations. His decision to conceal evidence in the courtroom had been misguided, but his motivations appeared to align with public interest rather than personal gain. The extraordinary events of the day had been set in motion by Emma's mysterious communication with Rex, leading to discoveries that might never have been made through conventional investigative methods. The combination of a child's intuition, a police dog's training, and thorough investigative work had unraveled a complex conspiracy that threatened both environmental safety and judicial integrity. As participants prepared to leave the courthouse, the implications of the day's revelations were still being processed by everyone involved. The case that had begun as a routine environmental hearing had evolved into a significant investigation with ramifications that would extend far beyond the original dispute between the Development Corporation and environmental advocates. 3 weeks after the extraordinary events at the Jefferson County Courthouse, the ripple effects of Emma Mitchell's remarkable intuition continued to transform the lives of everyone involved in the environmental case. The investigation that began with a 3-year-old girl's whispered words to a police dog had evolved into one of the most significant environmental fraud cases in Kentucky's legal history. Thomas Bradley sat in the conference room of the Kentucky Environmental Protection Agency, no longer the nervous accountant who had attempted to hide evidence in a courthouse bench. Instead, he'd been granted whistleblower protection status and was working closely with state and federal investigators to expose the full extent of Meridian Environmental Services' deceptive practices. His decision to preserve the original environmental data, despite his misguided methods, had saved crucial evidence that might otherwise have been permanently destroyed. "Mr. Bradley," said Assistant Attorney General Patricia Newman, "your cooperation has been instrumental in uncovering a pattern of environmental fraud that extends far beyond the Riverside development case. We now have evidence of similar cover-ups at 6 other development sites across the state." The revelation that Meridian Environmental Services had been systematically falsifying environmental impact reports for multiple clients had triggered a comprehensive investigation by state environmental authorities. The company's executives faced charges of fraud, conspiracy, and violation of federal environmental protection laws, while their corporate clients found themselves liable for extensive environmental remediation costs. Meanwhile, Sarah Mitchell had returned to her regular routine as a kindergarten teacher, but her perspective on her daughter's extraordinary abilities had been permanently changed. Emma's remarkable insights throughout that dramatic day in court had demonstrated an intuitive capacity that Sarah was still trying to understand and nurture appropriately. Dr. Rebecca Chen, a child psychologist specializing in gifted children, had begun working with Emma to better understand her unusual perceptiveness. During their sessions, Emma displayed an ability to read emotional and social cues that far exceeded typical developmental expectations, leading Dr. Chen to recommend specialized educational programs that could help Emma develop her gifts constructively. Emma demonstrates what we call exceptional emotional intelligence, Dr. Chen explained to Sarah during one of their consultations. Her ability to perceive underlying motivations and emotional states in adults is remarkable. With proper guidance, these skills could be channeled into fields like counseling, social work, or even law enforcement. At the courthouse, Officer Marcus Thompson and Rex had received commendations for their role in uncovering the environmental fraud conspiracy. Their partnership had once again demonstrated the value of police dog teams in complex investigations, and their story had been featured in law enforcement publications nationwide. Rex seemed to take particular pride in the recognition, though. His most treasured reward remained the occasional visit from Emma, who had developed a special friendship with the German Shepherd. During these visits, supervised by Officer Thompson, Emma would whisper to Rex about various observations and concerns, while the dog listened with the patient attention of a trained professional. "It's the strangest thing," Marcus confided to Detective Rodriguez during one of Emma's visits. "Rex responds to her differently than he does to anyone else. It's almost like they have their own communication system that we don't fully understand." Judge Patricia Coleman had implemented new courthouse security protocols based on the lessons learned from the concealed evidence incident. The discovery had highlighted potential vulnerabilities in courtroom security and the need for more sophisticated detection methods to prevent evidence tampering. The Riverside Development Corporation had reached a settlement agreement that included funding for comprehensive environmental remediation of the contaminated site, as well as the establishment of a community environmental monitoring program. The company's cooperation with the investigation had helped mitigate their legal exposure, though their reputation had been significantly damaged by the revelations about their reliance on falsified environmental reports. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh had used the case to launch a broader initiative focused on environmental crime prosecution, working with federal agencies to develop more effective methods for detecting and prosecuting corporate environmental fraud. The Riverside case had become a model for how seemingly routine civil litigation could uncover serious criminal activity. Defense attorney Robert Hayes had emerged from the case with an enhanced reputation for ethical practice and thorough investigation. His client's willingness to cooperate with authorities and accept responsibility for their environmental impact had helped minimize their legal liability while contributing to the broader investigation of environmental fraud. Dr. Margaret Foster's environmental research had gained national attention following the resolution of the case, leading to consulting opportunities with environmental protection agencies and academic institutions. Her testimony about the difference between authentic and falsified environmental data had become a reference point for training environmental scientists and legal professionals. Emma's story had attracted attention from child development researchers interested in studying exceptional intuitive abilities in young children. However, Sarah had been careful to protect her daughter's privacy while allowing limited research that might help other children with similar gifts. The little girl herself seemed largely unaffected by the attention her abilities had generated, continuing to display the natural curiosity and playfulness typical of her age. Her insights about adult behavior had become more frequent, But Sarah had learned to listen carefully to Emma's observations while helping her understand the appropriate times and ways to share her perceptions. One sunny afternoon, exactly 1 month after the courthouse incident, Emma and Sarah visited Rex and Officer Thompson at the police station. As they sat in the training facility, Emma whispered something to Rex that made the German Shepherd's tail wag enthusiastically. "What did you tell him this time?" Sarah asked her daughter with amusement. Emma looked up with the bright smile that had become even more precious to Sarah since their courthouse adventure. "I told him that the truth always comes out when good people work together, and that sometimes little girls and doggies can help grown-ups see things they missed." Officer Thompson chuckled at Emma's explanation, recognizing the wisdom in her simple observation. The case had indeed demonstrated how unconventional sources of insight could lead to important discoveries when combined with professional expertise and thorough investigation. As they prepared to leave the police station, Sarah reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since that morning when Emma had insisted on going to court to see the police dog. Her daughter's extraordinary intuition had not only helped expose environmental fraud, but had also opened doors to educational and developmental opportunities that would shape Emma's future. The environmental cleanup at the Riverside development site was progressing ahead of schedule, with community volunteers working alongside professional remediation teams to restore the contaminated areas. The project had become a model for community involvement in environmental restoration, bringing together residents, businesses, and government agencies in a collaborative effort. Thomas Bradley had found new purpose in his role as a witness and consultant in environmental fraud investigations. His accounting background and first-hand experience with corporate deception made him a valuable resource for investigators working to uncover similar schemes in other jurisdictions. The case had also led to new legislation strengthening whistleblower protections for employees who report environmental violations, ensuring that future Thomas Bradleys would have clearer legal pathways for exposing corporate misconduct without risking their careers or facing criminal charges for their methods. As Emma and Sarah drove home from their visit with Rex, the little girl gazed out the window at the scenic Kentucky countryside, her mind already processing observations and insights that adults might miss. Sarah had learned to appreciate her daughter's unique gifts while ensuring that Emma could still enjoy a normal childhood filled with play, learning, and discovery. The Jefferson County Courthouse had returned to its normal routine of civil and criminal proceedings, but the staff maintained a heightened awareness of unusual circumstances that might indicate concealed evidence or other irregularities. The lesson of Emma's remarkable intuition had become part of the courthouse culture, encouraging everyone to pay attention to details that might initially seem insignificant. 6 months later, Emma started kindergarten in a specialized program designed for intellectually gifted children, where her exceptional emotional intelligence could be nurtured alongside her academic development. Her teacher, Mrs. Jennifer Hayes, no relation to the attorney, quickly recognized Emma's unique abilities and worked to create learning opportunities that challenged her mind while respecting her emotional needs as a young child. The story of the little girl who helped solve an environmental fraud case had become something of a local legend, inspiring other children to trust their instincts and speak up when something seemed wrong. Emma's example had shown that age was no barrier to making important contributions to community safety and justice. Dear viewers, we hope that Emma and Sarah's remarkable story has moved and inspired you. This tale of intuition, courage, and the power of speaking truth demonstrates that sometimes the most extraordinary revelations come from the most unexpected sources. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore the complexity of human relationships and the amazing connections between people and animals. You can find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the fascinating ways that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences in their communities. We love hearing your thoughts and experiences, so please share your own stories of intuition and unexpected discoveries in the comments below. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these meaningful narratives to audiences who appreciate the wonder and mystery that exists in everyday life. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey, and we look forward to sharing more amazing stories with you soon.